Hello, everyone, and welcome to Housing Today Live. My name is Carl Brown. I'm the head of content at Assemble Media Group, and I'm chairing this debate today, which is sponsored by Atkins and Faithful and Gould, and it's all about residential MMC projects and the supply chain management, financing, and regulatory considerations that affect it. This topic is obviously a big one and is of crucial importance for the future of housing delivery. It's also very topical, given L&G's decision a few weeks ago to close its offsite factory and the financial difficulties faced by quite a few modular developers in recent weeks and months. Luckily, we have a really good panel to discuss all this today, who I shall now introduce. We have Andrew Shepherd, who's the Managing Director at modular developer Top Hat. We will shortly joining us will be Olivia Burton, who's the Senior Development Manager at London Land Group. And we have Ron Lang, who's the Regional Director and MMC Strategic Lead at Faithful and Gould. Each of our panelists will speak for around 10 minutes, which should leave us plenty of time for questions at the end of the session. And please do get involved. You can ask a question using the questions box on the side of your screen. It should be self-explanatory how to do that. But that's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who's Andrew Shepherd from Top Hat. Andrew, over to you.
Morning all, and thank you, Carl, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully share a very short presentation just to talk through some of the key points outlined by Carl in terms of what we're looking at from financing, using modular and how to make it easy. So I just start with where we were in 1919 when it comes to house building. So 1919, Homes for Heroes, the end of the First World War, we had a housing crisis. We needed to build lots of new homes. And we brought forward an army of workers to build these houses. But arguably, we still build houses the same way. At Top Hat, we take a slightly different approach. We are obviously a volumetric modular housing company. Now, I am always the first person to say the volumetric modular is not the solution to every single problem that we have in the world today. It is a solution and enables us to deliver some of the challenges that we face in housing today, and is certainly not appropriate for every single project. But as part of a suite of solutions and a range of different options, some of which Ron's going to talk about in a bit, it enables you to increase capacity in the market and deliver more homes. Now, this is how we are approaching home building in the 21st century. So this is how we deliver houses in a factory. So we're currently building a new factory in Corby. And we're going to be using robotics, we're going to be using high-tech engineering, we're going to automate the process, we're going to automate the design process to enable people to use these tools, to use the manufacturing. And this is going to enable us to increase productivity in the manufacturing process by about 4 to 5 times. And what that means is it reduces cost, it reduces our reliance on construction labour, where we have a huge workforce shortage. I think it's well known and understood that the construction workforce today is probably about 500,000 people fewer than it was 20 years ago. But at the same time, population in the UK has increased by about 10 million. So I think it goes without saying we have a problem that we need to address. Now, we know that the marketplace is difficult at the moment. We know that we've got record inflation. We know we've got a housing shortage. We know we have a climate emergency and poor quality housing. We've got some of the highest bills people have ever faced. But we also have that labour shortage. And all of these need us to think differently. If we think the answer is getting a bricklayer to deliver homes more quickly and work faster, then we're starting in absolutely the wrong place. So we do need to address these, and we need to think about how we can address these. And then when you overlay on some of these challenges, some of the regulatory issues that we're looking at, particularly like things like future home standards, which are about addressing climate emergency, some of the changes to Part L, and the golden thread that we talk about in house building today, looking at addressing some of the poor quality housing issues that we've got. Actually looking at an offsite solution, looking at modular allows us to address some of those problems through that approach. Now, one of the things I always like to talk about is looking at how we understand the process and how we can think about making modular work and offsite work. Now, one of the challenges that we often face is that people say to us, and let's not beat about the bush, it's the QS, and yes, I am a QS. If I may draw a wall 2.4 meters instead of 2.5 meters, I'm going to save money. Now, one of the things with modular and offsite is actually asking a very different question. It's about asking, what is the most efficient thing for you to build? Because that'll be about process, that'll be about materials, that'll be about design, that'll be about so many more things than just reducing the height of the building. And I take the case of a 2.5 meter high wall versus a 2.4 meter high wall. In our factory, the materials arrive at 2.5, they go straight to the finishing line and maneuvered straight onto the wall. If we were to do that at 2.4 meters, we'd have to create a processing area, we'd have to handle that with processing equipment, we'd have to cut that material, then we create waste, then we'd have to handle that material again to go into the finishing line, and then it will go into the wall. So there are 4 additional stages and processes that we would create out of doing that, as well as waste. And we wouldn't save any money, definitely, from the process you can see there. We all know that interest rates are rising. We know they went up by 50 basis points last week, and that is having a massive impact on the viability of projects. So one of the things we look at is how using offsite can help to address some of the challenges that creates. Now, we start to look at groundworks. Groundworks are no different from a traditional build to a modular solution, particularly not with top hat. They're very much site specific. But by about month 6, we're starting to deliver homes onto site, and then we're delivering about 15 homes a month. So when we look at a 270 home project, we're delivering in about 2 years. Whereas if you were to look at delivering that using a traditional project, you'd be looking at 5 years. So that's an increase in prelims cost. That's a significant increase in project finance, and actually can affect the project viability. And just finally, one of the questions I always ask is, what should MMC do? We get asked this a lot by our customers, by people who are looking to invest. And actually, it should reduce design costs, because you're focusing primarily on that initial design, that's that stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 design. You shouldn't be paying architects and engineers to do stage 4, stage 5 technical details. In fact, what we should be doing is creating a higher value process where architects are inputting much earlier in the design process. We should be reducing permitting costs because projects are quicker. We should be reducing aftercare and occupation costs. This is because we should be building to a higher quality. We should be delivering better quality outcomes for residents, which will obviously reduce bills, will reduce maintenance, and all the costs associated with owning property. We should be able to mitigate some of the inflationary impacts that we're currently experiencing. With modular and with offsite, you should be buying all of your materials and placing all of your subcontracts much earlier in the construction process. So with Top Hat, we would tend to place 100% of material orders on the day we sign a contract. So we're not taking inflation during that construction process and trying to place orders over a 2, 3, or 4 year process. And one of the other areas is looking at how this can enable people to do more. So we talk about reducing corporate overheads. Actually, the reality is we should be able to do more with the same number of people. The problem we've got is we're delivering too few homes at present. We don't have enough people in the industry to allow us to build those homes that we desperately need. So the challenge we've got is actually, how can we be more productive? How can we be more efficient and do more with the same people? And MMC and modular can actually allow us to do that. And then what I always say is, again, think about this in terms of the cost of capital. With the cost of capital rising significantly, it's a really important part of the conversation. We need to think about how modular can allow us to deliver projects more quickly. And if you're looking at projects from a build to rent perspective or from a housing association perspective, then what you will be doing is realizing rents earlier. You'll be realizing an IRR benefit from that earlier cash income from the rental receipts. So factoring that into project appraisals rather than looking just purely at CapEx. So that's all I'm going to say today. I will hand back to you, Carl.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And I thought that was great. I thought that set the scene really well. It was a really useful overview of the current market and how MMC fits into it and its role to play in boosting productivity and efficiency. I think we've we've been joined now by Olivia Burton. Olivia, are you there from the London Land Group? If so, do you want to turn your camera on, please?
Olivia is still having some technical issues.
Okay, I think Olivia is having some technical difficulties. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip straight to Ron Lang of Faithful and Gould. Ron, over to you.
Thank you, Carl. Just a second, share my screen. It's not going well, Carl. I can't get my my shared screen up now. I'm going to have to go for an entire screen share, so just let me know if you can see this slide deck, please.
It looks okay to me, Ron.
Okay, we'll go for this method. So, morning, everybody. A really nice introduction there from Andrew, and sets the scene for what I'm going to talk about quite nicely as well. So what I wanted to try and look at, I've spent probably the last 10 or so years looking at why this sort of revolution hasn't happened, but from a positive position of how we can then break down some of those barriers. So this is the kind of slightly negative answer, I guess, that you get first. Can industrialized construction solve our housing delivery problem? And I think the answer I just wanted to quickly go through at the start of this to provoke some thought really is that no, not on its own, with a slight caveat of sorry. I am an industrialized construction evangelist. It's an overused word, but it absolutely is the future. But it won't work if it's treated like a way to kind of put a sticking plaster over the existing system. So I wanted to go through a few quick slides as quickly as I can. It's a very complicated topic, I guess, that many of us are sort of familiar with, and it is quite oversimplified in some respects. So happy to have questions, happy to have challenge, and get a good debate going. So this is what I wanted to talk about. The elephant in the room that's been there for a long time, certainly as long as I've been looking at this, is the sort of juxtaposition between offsite production, as I call it. I try and avoid the term MMC, despite the fact that it's in my title, and the sort of the predominant UK house building business model. So what do I mean by that? So if you go back 7 or 8 years, I did some research with Loughborough University at the time, and we spent a lot of time doing a lot of interviews with some of the top sort of 10 to 15 house builders to understand the production model of the way they operate. Now, I'm going to caveat this quite heavily. Andrew mentioned build to rent and of course social housing. What I'm talking about here is still the part of our model which dominates, which is speculative private sector house building. And what we learn there is that, of course, we're very, very dependent on those private sector house builders, but they are, and this is not a criticism, they are driven by profit, and they are vulnerable, of course, to market volatility. So what we did, just to cut a very long story short, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about this particular piece of research, is that they have to be able to control and manage their work in progress, and they have to be able to vary the speed and vary the sequence of the houses they deliver on a particular site, to be able to make sure they return the profits they expected from the uplift in the land. So again, I've gone very quickly through that, but I think it's fairly common knowledge in terms of how the business model of speculative house building works. But what's really interesting from a sort of MMC, if you like, or industrialized construction perspective, is the way they do that is by having a very flexible workforce. Of course, they can bring people on and release them as and when they need to. They've got materials which are not specific to any particular plot. Generally speaking, they can be moved around the site to suit whichever house it is they're trying to progress. And they can actually, even although less often, they can also vary the product mix. So they can vary which ones they decide to build out in which order based on the way that the market is absorbing those properties. So again, I'm not going to go into loads of detail on that, but if we kind of accept that effectively what we're saying to the speculative house builders is that, now you can have this future where things will arrive exactly when we said they would. And of course, you'll be able to build your sites out a lot quicker. And the logical response from the existing model is that's great, but actually my profitability directly depends on my ability to manage and control that work in progress and to control the amount of supply that I put into that local market. So again, this is not me speaking particularly out of turn. There's a huge amount of work that's gone into this and research over the last number of years. So I guess what I wanted to very quickly talk about was how we kind of address this impasse, this elephant in the room, I guess. And people if you've heard me talk about before, I always talk about zooming out, but just sort of stepping back from the problem that we're looking at. So these are very, very oversimplified, and I apologize for that, but I think you'll probably understand why. If you look at the existing model, if we have an off-site production approach to a development site, you get very fast and predictable output from the factories, and that unfortunately isn't compatible with a very sort of relatively slow and quite unpredictable way of managing how those houses get built and put into the local market. If you add to that the fact that those off-site products are influenced or are dependent on understanding the local context, so we don't have standardized products really that can be rolled out to any site, then we end up with quite a difficult situation. So first of all, we get a mismatch between the sort of fast and predictable nature of off-site production and the slow and unpredictable nature of housing delivery. And then we also see that the fact that we have that contextual impact on what it is we build, that also makes it quite difficult to very repeatably and reliably churn things out of factory environments. So I guess the question that I've spent a long time trying to tackle, and we still are trying to tackle, is how we sort of decouple this very stable manufacturing environment from a less stable sort of build out model. So a couple of scenarios to consider. One is sort of one of the obvious ones that people jump straight to. Okay, well, can we have some kind of stock? Can we have some kind of buffer of these off-site products such that we can still then pull them as and when they're needed on the development site? Now, this doesn't really solve the problem. It just moves the problem. We still have to store these things. We still actually have a lot of work in progress. It's just stored somewhere else. And there's a lot of risk to that type of model. It doesn't really address the problem we're trying to address. The next step on is that sort of zooming out and saying, well, across lots of different development sites, can we not produce at relatively fast scale, with predictability from off-site facilities, and then just balance which sites they go to? And that sounds great, except for the point I made earlier, which is that those development sites will have certain local requirements on what it is that's built. And therefore, you can't just produce things in the factory environment and hope or guarantee that they'll be needed in a particular local area. So this is where I guess the up and coming, although it's not a new concept of platforms, comes in, which is to say, if we could understand all of the things that need to be built over a period of time, a sort of portfolio approach, and we could do what the government called harmonize, rationalize, and digitize, we could look across all those requirements and understand which proportions of those houses effectively can actually be common and repeatable and which do need to vary from site to site. Once you've done that, you can give off-site production, efficiency by having stable demand for these sort of common repeatable elements. And they can then go to development sites knowing that they're going to work, knowing that they make sense for that particular site. So if you look at the sort of text I've got here, you've got a process of rationalizing the requirements across a portfolio of assets across many, many different sites. You've got development of common repeatable elements that are fit for purpose for all of those sites. You've then got the scale and aggregated demand for those components to be produced at a decent rate. And you've decoupled where they go to because they're not site specific. And in the end, we end up with high quality mass customized products. So this is not about standardization, it's about mass customization. And we also have a feedback loop in there, which means those products can continuously improve. So like I say, quite a complicated topic, but I wanted to kind of end on this note that we feel, having worked in this space for the last 5 or 6 years, that the adoption of platform approaches can enable adoption of offsite production. So what I'm saying there is it enables offsite production to be more viable. The business case in terms of the benefits we get are very strong, as Andrew set out, but how do we enable it to become viable? But I guess the slightly sour note to end on is that we can't truly transform, and I've put in brackets there, private sector housing, until we challenge the value drivers that underpin it. So effectively, we're trying to offer a product, or we're trying to offer outcomes from offsite production, which don't really match the drivers of the business model that we have currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Some really interesting thoughts there about the elephant in the room, about making manufacturing fit in with the traditional speculative house building model, particularly in a volatile environment. And I'm sure there'll be lots more questions about that in the Q&A at the end. I'd like to introduce now Olivia Burton of London Land Group. We seem to have sorted out the technical difficulties, so great you could join us, Olivia. I'm going to hand over straight to you for your presentation.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And yeah, apologies about all of our technological challenges. I am just going to see if I can bring up my slides. check that that's working. Yeah, okay. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so I am likely going to be coming at this from a slightly different angle than my predecessors. I work for a company called London Land Group, who are an SME developer, and we are predominantly focusing on high-rise residential apartments. As a business, these are kind of groups, kind of core values, and a big part of what we're looking to do is actually to deliver a total concept approach, where we look at breaking down apartments essentially to 6 modules in total, or 6 components, and that's a mixture of kind of podded elements, but we're also working with a few partners on precast facade and frames, so that overall we can simplify our development on site. So what I'm going to be talking about today is 2 projects in particular that we have in the pipeline. So we've got the waterfront down in Poole, which is live on site, and that is 291 units. It ranges from 7 stories through to 11 stories and is all precast facade and frame, and some modular elements within the apartments. And then we also have our Bromley scheme, which is currently in for planning, which varies again up to 12 stories from kind of 6, 7. And the idea is this will be our first project where we roll out the full sort of total concept piece that we're looking at. And what I'm going to try and pick on today is some of the lessons learned, or almost live lessons, I suppose, that we're going through in terms of trying to integrate modern methods of construction into apartment schemes, and talk about some of the challenges that we're facing. And I thought, although it's not a supply chain or kind of regulatory point, I thought the one thing that I really want to try and touch on is program. And that's because this is something that it's very easy to say, oh, it's so much quicker on site with MMC. But one of the big problems that we've had on Poole in particular is just the level of design coordination that is required in order to enable that delivery on site to be slick. And particularly with precast facade and frame, we've had lots of issues where kind of late information in terms of load takedown has then resulted in additional piles having to go in the ground. And it's purely because we've tried to lap the design and the delivery more than we should have, I suppose. And that was ultimately because we have program drivers that led us to needing to do that. A couple of other challenges that we've had in terms of design coordination is just even down to basic components, with MEP kind of being cast into different panels. And as I say, kind of the structural load takedown, what all of that has kind of impacted on back to that is that ultimately, to deliver the MMC above ground, we've got a huge transfer raft, which is still done in situ. And one of the common threads that I think is prevalent throughout everything I'm going to talk about is the interfaces that still exist between modern methods of construction that you can build off-site, and then when you bring it to site, how you make that fit into in-situ construction, which is typically built to far less onerous tolerances, and isn't always easy to control in the same way. And this hopefully is just a really crude, we actually used this for an internal presentation recently, shows that although the delivery on site programme might be much quicker, actually overall, we don't think at the minute that we're saving a huge amount of time from project inception through to project completion. It's just that more needs to be spent on the front end before you actually start on site. Kind of building on that, some of the other kind of big issues that we've had is the point at which finance is required. So being an SME developer, obviously it's a really big, important point for us. And we are IRR driven, like a lot of businesses I've worked for in the past. So the point at which you need to borrow money and the duration at which you need to have that finance available to you is often increased with modern methods of construction, is purely because you need to place orders for things much earlier than you typically would if you were constructing them on site, or kind of out of sequence with that, so that you can enable that off-site production to happen. Another problem that we are often facing is that finance arrangements don't understand yet or fully appreciate payments for off-site materials. So, for example, with our precast facade that's being completed at the minute for Poole, we had to pay up front for kind of aggregate and liners that are specific to our project and the moulds in which ultimately form the facade. But to explain to somebody that that is a specific asset or a tangible thing that needs to be paid for up front, we faced challenges with that. It was seen instead as advance payments, as something that put our finance partner at risk, rather than them understanding kind of how it played into the bigger picture. And obviously that creates a huge cash flow problem if you can't undertake testing process or things like that for off-site materials. Another kind of problem that we're facing at the minute is lack of just genuine supply chain partners who can meet program. So we had, I won't name names, but we started off with a different precast facade and frame company than the one that we're using now. And we ended up having to switch very last minute purely because their already existing allocation meant that they couldn't, they kind of let us down last minute and couldn't achieve our program deadlines. And we were looking at kind of a 6 to 12-month delay in order to get frame and facade through them. And we've had similar issues with kind of pod manufacturers where ultimately we'll be talking to them, go through the tender process, we go to that contract, and then all of a sudden actually their availability is just, it's too tight, they can't make it work. And then lastly, obviously, just in terms of tendering, we have lots of external stakeholders where we may need to be able to demonstrate best value being achieved, and currently there are just fewer supply chain options available to us when we're going out to tender to be able to kind of crudely put across that you've had 3 or 4 good value quotations and you've gone with the cheapest partner. To get around some of that, we are looking at establishing frame agreements, which obviously helps, but it's not a perfect one-size-fits-all solution. And then lastly, I'm just going to touch on something else that is really kind of plaguing us from a regulatory perspective at the minute, and that is fire stopping. I've sat on plenty of kind of industry seminars about the same, and I'm sure many people on the call today would have done that as well, around how you actually fire stop and create compartments when you have multiple modules within one overall compartment. It makes people incredibly nervous when you start talking about piecing together multiple components just purely because you end up creating potential routes for smoke and fire that are not very visually obvious and are not very clear to see initially. And one thing that I've put on the slide here at the minute is about EWS1. So that is something that now for every home that's constructed, you need to go out and procure an EWS1 certificate. And trying to find somebody who can do that for us is very challenging at present because they're nervous around the elements of kind of models and modern methods of construction that we have. Some of the things that they've talked about is want to be able to see and sign off on every kind of interface or every individual component, which obviously isn't possible. Some of them just can't physically get back to see where they are. And similarly, just in terms of where we've got precast facade panels, obviously they make the panels to suit the overall exterior of the facade, necessarily to perfectly line up internally, where we've got compartment walls and party walls. And in the instances where we've got a concrete party wall, it's less of a challenge, but we have instances where we've got dry-lined party walls meeting concrete facade panels, and it creates mixed methods of construction, and it does make people incredibly nervous at the minute trying to demonstrate how you've sufficiently fire stopped that. I don't necessarily have a perfect solution as it stands currently. We are continuing to work through kind of what we can do to improve some of that for our next project, but I just wanted to highlight that again, it's been a real kind of sticking point for us. Latterly, kind of as we get to the end of the project as well, warranties. At the minute, we're finding it very hard working through submitting information around kind of waterproofing details, and as I say, the interface between off-site construction and what still needs to be done on-site, kind of as Ron was touching on, there isn't yet a perfect solution where the whole building itself can be constructed off-site. You will always have an interface, and demonstrating how you've kind of sufficiently closed those out is very challenging. So I will finish off there. Hopefully that was interesting, just to kind of touch on some of the challenges that we're facing, and look forward to receiving some questions.
Thanks, Olivia. That was indeed very interesting. There's lots of stuff there on the various considerations when looking at MMC, including supply chain, financial, and regulatory considerations. I think there was, I think the stuff that you touched on towards the end there about building safety regulation concerns as well was also really interesting. Because sometimes gets overlooked in some of these discussions, I think. If I could ask the other panelists to turn their cameras back on now, and we can move to the Q&A. I can see we've got quite a few questions from the audience. So if I could invite Andrew and Ron just to click their cameras back on, please. Okay, I'm not sure whether they can hear me or not.
Yeah, we can see them, Carl.
We can see them. Okay, I can't for some reason. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, I thought before we get into some of the more technical questions, I just wanted to ask Ron something. So Ron, you ended your present. I think it's fair to say you ended your presentation on a slightly downbeat note when you talked about the industry needing to change its value drivers in order to to boost take up in this area. Could you expand on that, please? Were you talking about sort of procurement and value in that sense, or did you mean something else?
No, thanks, Carl, for the opportunity to clarify on that. So people are probably not aware. So I led the development of something called the Value Toolkit for quite a few years, which building covered quite extensively. The whole idea of this is that we start to ask more outcome-based questions around the decisions that we make. So where I was coming from there is I spend a lot of time working client side to try and help them build, or we build on their behalf, benefits cases for offsite construction, for example, industrialized construction. And what it needs you to do is to recognize that the inherent attributes of an offsite production approach aren't necessarily always a benefit. So we say it's quicker and it's, you're going to get higher quality and things like that. If the client that you're talking about don't value those things, then clearly those things aren't a benefit. So I'm trying to be quite subtle, I guess, as much as I can. But if you look at the speculative building model, it does perfectly the job that it's asked to do. It's it's a competitive market. They try to raise profits for shareholders. And at the moment, the way that you do that and the way that you make the most money is by sort of controlling flow and supply. You aren't really competing on the quality of the products that you produce because we're so short on housing. It's that kind of thing. So what I was trying to say was that the predominant business model that we have for delivering the vast majority of our housing doesn't value the attributes that an offsite production approach can bring at the moment. So until we address that, then I think what we end up doing is trying to almost see this as a technical problem, where it's a bigger problem than that. So we've had a bit of a mix across the three presentations of sort of very detailed technical issues and some slightly concerning, I guess, issues that were raised by Olivia there. I still don't think we're feeding the factories, or we're feeding offsite production in a way that makes it viable. So how is it that we can change the way we deliver housing to make it viable to have manufacturing facilities that can operate in a more stable way, I suppose?
Olivia, you were nodding there for a second. Do you agree with Ron's analysis there about the mismatch between value drivers and the benefits of MMC?
Sorry, my internet just cut out there. Yeah, a lot of what Ron said there we're experiencing in terms of, you have this expectation that it is going to be a perfect solution, and it's not. There are other things that then need to take priority and you need to consider. So yeah, just to echo what he said earlier.
Andrew, did you want to come in on that point before we move on?
No, look, I think it's a really fair point, and obviously, as you know, Persimmon are now a shareholder in Top Hat and have invested in heavily. One of the things I do see is that all of the house builders have invested in MMC in one form or another. I think all of the big house builders have a timber frame factory or two that they run and operate to deliver their homes. And the challenge is not sort of continuing to deliver homes on a 4 houses a month type basis. The challenge now is actually delivering future home standard. And what's interesting is to see how the changes in standards, the changes in regulations may start to force a sort of a different look at how you deliver those homes. So we're seeing a subtle transition between, and I think Ron hit the nail on the head at the moment. It's a gross profit driven business. The best way to deliver it is to continue to trickle out houses. But actually that's changing with some of the regulatory onboarding with future home standards, Part L, golden threads, those sorts of things.
Yeah, because in your presentation, Andrew, you talked about the reduced cost, didn't you? Reduced design costs and defect costs, and this ties into a question I can see that's just come in actually, where people were saying, You know, given the points raised about risk mitigation by you, Andrew, why aren't more clients favouring MMC schemes given this improved risk profile? And does industry have a role to play in convincing clients of these benefits?
Yeah. There's a phrase my friends in IT always use, and no one ever got fired for choosing IBM. No one's ever going to get fired for choosing a traditional construction methodology. Going a different approach using MMC takes a bit more courage. Let's be honest. You've seen all the press. We've seen all the press. It's the difficult answer. So it's quite easy to go the traditional approach. And actually, that's probably one of the biggest challenges is getting people to think differently. So taking them on the journey, working collaboratively. It takes a lot of time to get people into the right place to do this. And the first project is never the one that works best. It was really interesting to see all the issues that Olivia outlined in her presentation. That's my experience of doing it first time with MMC using panelized precast. The second time, we sort of realized 10 to 20% benefits, and then the third and the fourth time, it sort of rolled on. So the first one is a learning experience, and everybody is learning. And the second one is about sort of embedding that learning process and that continuous improvement into what you do.
Okay, I think I might move on to some of the other questions from the audience. So Michael Warwick wants to know, what do you see as the common repeatable components? Surely executive housing, I'm not quite sure what he means by that, but he says executive housing demands larger rooms than accommodation for the social housing sector. So I suppose it's this point about how you repeat components when there's different demands from clients. I think that's the point. Does anybody want to come in on that?
Yep, I'll jump in on that. So there is a bugbear of mine at the moment is sort of some of our language in this space. So we tend to use the term modular to describe volumetric. Volumetric is a way of doing modular, but what we're really saying is having discrete elements that can be separated and put back together. Now, the interesting thing in terms of what should be standardized, people usually jump to certain sort of mental models with that, sort of say, well, how can you standardize it into a group of volumetric modules? And in some cases, as Andrew said, in some cases that works and sometimes it doesn't. Homes England are just in the process of, or DLUC actually, sorry, are just in the process of going through an interesting study to look at what these sort of repeatable elements could be across portfolios of products. And in the last few stages of the Construction Innovation Hub work, which I was still involved with, we also did quite a lot of work on how you do that. What's the process you go through? And it means you need to group things. You need to group things into similar types of products to then say, if we're to break those products down, which of these things really need to be different? Where does a customer value difference? And where actually does it make no difference? So if you think about things, if you go back to other work that was done, and I'm trying to remember what it was called, MCH, I think it was called, where they looked at the specifications of a lot of the major house builders and said, well, actually things like stairs or windows or door sets and things like that, do they really need to be different from developer to developer, from site to site? And of course, the answer is generally no. So it's really about doing that mapping exercise. I don't think anyone's quite got the answer yet. And there will be space for 3D modularization, 2D modularization, 1D. But what's also really important to remember is that repeatability, commonality, if you like, in the sort of platform language, isn't just about physical stuff. It's about which processes can be so much better if they were standardized, and which relationships could be standardized and be so much better, so we're not reinventing the supply chain every time. So there are quite a lot of resources out there that have been developed recently. There are a few projects in the mill right now that are looking at what that looks like. But I would just encourage people to be careful with the language that we choose. What we're not saying is that you break every single house we're ever going to build into volumetric modules and standardize those. That is part of the solution, as Andrew says, for sure. But there's a much broader view about what needs to be common and where we still need customization and variability.
Okay. Any thoughts from you?
Sorry, Carl. Yeah, I was just going to jump in if that's okay, in terms of some of the things that we are trying to see as repeatable. And that is essentially we're trying to do combined bathroom pods. So where we have two bathrooms kind of back to back, bring those in as one unit. And the same, we've got some instances where we've got combined kitchen and bathroom modules, because the reality is when we started off the pool project, I think with 34 different flat types. we're now down to 10 or 12 to suit a different kind of apartment size and a different spec. But we're not actually offering a huge amount of customization, and we're not getting much feedback from the market about wanting a huge amount of customization within those either. So actually for us so far, kind of combining those components together and repeating them en masse and just changing kind of handing or the size of them to suit the different flat types is actually working, dare I say it, fairly effectively. That's probably one of the areas that it has been working quite well for us. And I think there's areas in which you can offer people a kind of an element of customization, like we're doing that with kind of connected living. So we've got a partnership agreement with Samsung, who are working with us on all of our accommodation, but we offer a kind of a range then of different ways that you can customize your home from that perspective, rather than having to change physical kind of like materials or spec. And as I say, it's working at the minute. Whether it works across the board, I don't know. But I think there is also a bit of a piece around, you know, why, especially from an apartment perspective, if you've got 291 apartments and you've got, say, a few 1 and 2, 3 beds, or, you know, 35% in London of those that are affordable, why would you fit them out completely differently than, you know, everything else that you've got? It's still going to be roughly the same kind of components and types. You might just have a slightly lower grade finish potentially. So that's my 2 pence.
Okay. Andrew, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, it was only a very short thought on that, and even within the modular world and MMC more generally, actually standardization is sometimes significantly overthought. You know, one of the things we look at doing, and I've done in my current business and previous businesses, is always focus on actually, you know, building a wall the same. A wall thickness doesn't need to change. We build our bungalows and our 4-story apartments with exactly the same wall width. It's being a bit lazy on a bungalow, but it's working properly on 4 stories. And actually that allows you to maximize the process, maximize the materials procurement, maximize the efficiencies in the process throughout. And that can be the same on floors, that can be the same on walls, ceilings, you know, many different parts of the design process. And then with design automation, parametric design, actually the changes that are required as you update designs can be entirely automated. So that customization is there today, it's available, and it's more than deliverable.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I'm now going to take a question from somebody called Brid Ryan, who's from Fingal County Council in Ireland, and it's a bit of a challenge to some of the stuff I think you were saying, Andrew, about design costs. So he says, I can't see how design costs will be reduced overall, given the complex coordination required up front.
It definitely won't be the first time you do it, as I mentioned before. But thereafter, it should be significantly reduced. You know, if you're using standard repeatable components, standard connection details, there you can drive down costs significantly. You know, for us as a modular company, and I can talk to that specifically, then, you know, for houses, our design costs are very low because they're already stage 5 detailed design, every single one. Our apartments, all of the modules are stage 5 detailed design as well already. So again, that allows us to expedite that design process. And the connection details are understood and already designed. So we were able to take, you know, months out of that design process. Unfortunately, the real challenge with design is planning, but we're not here to discuss that.
Okay. I mean, if you did want to talk about planning, Andrew, I'll allow you to, if it's relevant to answering that question. But
look, I think planning is an interesting one. We're not sort of addressing planning as in the UK at the moment. It's a massive hold up. Things are taking far too long to get through, and you know, one of the interesting things that's been part of the DLUT engagement is whether or not we should start with one of the design assumptions being working around bricks. If our solution to addressing the housing crisis is how we work around bricks, then let's be honest, we're all starting in the wrong place.
Ron, you were nodding there. Did you have anything you wanted to add to what Andrew said?
Yeah, Andrew went there first, so that's okay, isn't it? I think it's really interesting in this the world that I suppose I'm preaching about, which is how do we work out what needs to be customized really and what can be standardized. And I think there's a debate to say that we're often responding to what planners feel needs to be customized rather than what the end users need to customize. And I give really simple examples. Yeah, every other person has an iPhone that looks pretty much exactly the same as the person next to them. So whilst that's not a house, and I appreciate that, I don't think we do enough engagement with the actual market, with the actual users and people experiencing these properties to understand where they really want customization. In the car industry, whilst we hate to draw those parallels, they're very, very clear on the type of customization that people want in their vehicles. And we need to kind of have a similar level of understanding, I think, in the built environment. So yeah, Andrew went there first. It wasn't me.
Okay, Olivia, did you have anything to add on that, or
No, I think the only thing I would note is that I think Andrew's right. As you move through and you've got your kind of your own modules and components set up, the module itself, there's very little that you're going to do to change that. I think where there is still quite a large element of design that perhaps we all overlook is that coordination between those modules and bringing them together to suit every site. Unfortunately, we take on a lot of very constrained sites, like our building in Bromley, for example, is on a very small kind of tricky site that a third of which is undevelopable because of a culvert. There's always a piece of work to do to coordinate the perfect offsite modules that you're going to have and your offsite construction with then the constraints and the shape of the building that you're bringing forward. I think for a lot of housing schemes or, where we are lucky, like on Poole, for example, it's a square site. It works to bring things up in fairly standard layouts and standard arrangements. And I think whilst your designers might not be having to detail every bathroom and kitchen through to stage 5 ever again, there's always going to be a lot of work for them to do to coordinate how they're going to fit those into specific apartment layouts to suit that site. And likewise, I mentioned the example with in situ structure, you're always going to have an element of works on-site foundations, whether you've got a transfer deck or not, that the MMC's got to relate back through and into. And there is a lot of work in doing that.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. I may come back to you straight away, actually, Olivia, on this one, because somebody is asking about supply chain, which is something that you were talking about a bit in your presentation. So Akila Rathnasinghe asks, in order to have a mass customization, is the current supply chain matured enough? Because in such, it's all about a collaboration of few factories and materials suppliers. So what's your view on that? I suppose it can be interpreted in different ways, but is the current supply chain mature enough, in your opinion?
I mean, my view, I would say not, but equally, modern methods of construction, it's always something that cracks me up because it's actually something that we've been talking about and looking at for an incredibly long time. It doesn't actually feel that modern anymore. But the supply chain, I don't think really has caught up twofold. And I think one, that's in terms of actual companies who can produce at the scale and pace that the industry needs if we are going to use this as a solution moving forwards. But I think it's also about the element of production and kind of, so much of it has to be done even overseas at the minute because we don't have a huge amount of supply chain within the UK that is making modules, and there's already an additional challenge within that where people are having difficulties understanding our regulatory requirements and what we need. And in an ideal world, you would have one supply chain partner that can see you through every single project, but it isn't always a perfect scenario, and you may need to go out to 2 or 3 other suppliers. And it's not easy to do that at the minute. That there isn't a raft of people just sat there waiting around ready to build modules for you is the honest answer.
And why do we think that is? Why is the supply chain lagging behind? I don't know whether anybody else wants to come in on that, or Olivia, if you want to expand on that.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think one of the other questions I can see it's floating around is obviously around some of the recent companies that have folded within this space. I think there's an element of the uptake perhaps hasn't been what people always thought it was going to be. I think, our experience of so we're using a precast facade and frame company at the minute. They actually make all of their own aggregates. So their process from end to end for that production sits with them. They haven't got to rely on other people. Therefore, they haven't been hit by other price hikes that have happened within the industry because it's all within their gift of control. But not everybody is fortunate with that. And, you see it in the contractor market just the same as you see it in the offsite. The raw components have increased. And if you've taken on a project at a fixed price, you can't go back and renegotiate based on that price hike. You've got to deliver it regardless. And I think that makes it, it's a long manufacture process. You're letting that contract up front. It's a big risk.
You sorry, I'll let you jump in. Sorry.
That's all right, Carl. I got excited.
You've seen my train of thought entirely, so
that's fine. The question resonated with me, I guess, particularly in this sort of platform space we've been operating in, because the idea of trying to bring some supply chain resilience and redundancy is a really big part of it, which says that too often, obviously, Faithful and Gold often sit client side. We lose a supplier, and it is very, very difficult to then bring another one in. If you go back to some of the stuff I was talking about with the traditional housing model, those materials and those skills and those trades can be repurposed anywhere. You could go to a different site, you could go to a different property on the site, whatever, it doesn't matter. The ability to bring in a different proprietary system is obviously very, very limited. So I think one of the things I'm really interested, slightly concerned about, I guess, is there is a race for vertical integration at the moment. That's what it feels like. And there's a bit of a lack of sort of lateral integration, whereby suppliers and manufacturers probably have agreed what they should compete on and where they should collaborate. And I don't think that's happened. So the maturity question in that or that part of the question, I find really interesting, because I think the sort of 5 years of the Construction Innovation Hub journey showed us that there was a lot of nervousness around giving away IP or giving away, their competitive advantage. But there wasn't a clear enough conversation on where they should be competing. So, for example, if they all produced exactly the same products, but their process of doing so and their delivery of producing those things was different, there's still a way to compete. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the answer, but we do need a much more mature debate about what should be shared across different suppliers and where they should really be competing. Because to try and convince a client right now to put your eggs in a particular basket with very little get out of jail free card later if that supplier goes is very challenging. So that's how the question resonated with me. But
yeah, okay. I'm going to move on and to a question that Olivia's already alluded to a few minutes ago, so it's kind of partially answered. But James Harrison wants to know what are the panel's thoughts about why a number of MMC companies have recently withdrawn from the market. Now, there's different types of organizations have withdrawn from the market, different circumstances. But I suppose really it's, are there any common threads that you think behind these kind of failures or withdrawals from the market? Does anybody want to come in on that one?
Well, maybe I should pick that one up, Carl, as an MMC manufacturer. And thank you very much for that question. It's one that I get on a probably hourly basis at the moment. Yeah. Look, there's a lot of different routes to market. There's a lot of different ways of doing MMC, and there's a lot of different people trying to tackle the problem in different ways. My starting position will be that what we need is a healthy, competitive market. We need lots of players in the market and giving that confidence. With any nascent industry, you need that confidence. You need those things in there. So, from a top hat perspective, very much we want to see a successful market and good players. Different people have tackled the market in different ways. We only act as a main contractor, supplying product to third-party customers and working with a wide range of different customers. I think the ones that were referenced earlier both tend to have a vertically integrated model, particularly in terms of the development being the developer, buying sites. That's not our approach, and that we think there's a whole different way of doing these things. Both have cited planning as an issue, and I believe that to a degree, because if you're waiting, we're on average I think over a year in planning for projects at the moment. If you're anticipating planning in 6 months and it's taking you over a year, then that's 6 months worth of pipeline that you're potentially losing, and that hurts. So there's a number of different things there, and one of the challenges to that, and one of the opportunities, is to change from going from a construction in a shed approach to an advanced manufacturing approach, and looking at realizing the productivity gains and those things that can be realized from an offsite approach.
Okay, Ron or Olivia, do either of you want to come in on that?
I'll wade in and try and give some balance. I guess the first thing I'd say is that the MMC supply sector is under the microscope constantly. There are construction organisations going bankrupt and out of business every single day. Even in my feed this morning, there were multiple. So I think that's needs to be remembered is that we're under increased scrutiny. I do think there's something in, and hopefully I've interpreted what the other speakers have said. There's something in this sort of vertical integration thing of maybe the ability to really control your pipeline. The more vertically integrated you are, you can control what your market looks like, and you control the pipeline of stuff that you're trying to serve. I don't think still that's the case for things like planning and issues that get that are outside of your control. I guess that's another reason why this sort of lateral integration idea of, well, how do we control a pipeline by looking across and looking at other developers and trying to serve different markets at the same time, to give yourself a bit more redundancy than relying on sort of trying to control a particular part of the market. So I'm not qualified enough, and certainly not as qualified as Andrew is, to come on this, but I did want to make that first point, which is that we're at a huge scrutiny as a sector, and whenever anyone blinks, it must be that the MMC doesn't work, which clearly just isn't a very mature answer. So thank you.
Okay. Let's move on. We've got a few minutes, so I'm going to try and take a couple of questions, but if we can try and keep it quick fire, that would be great. So we've got a question from Thomas McNiven, who says, you mentioned customers need to be brave in order to select an off-site manufacturing approach, but is enough effort being invested into the education of customers and their advisors to make them aware of the benefits compared to the traditional route?
Stephen, that was my statement, I think. Look, I think there is. We are engaging with customers at various different levels. You could always do more, let's be honest. And events like this, run by Housing Today, and other events run by Building, are an important part of that market engagement. And we continue to support that. It's not just engaging with customers, it's engaging with insurers, it's engaging with different people that have an effect. So UK Finance, for example, they finance all of the mortgage markets, engaging with them as well. So it's engaging with the entire supply chain, working within the industry, that's really important.
Just from my perspective, obviously, because in some respects I act as almost a customer or client, I think one of the challenges from our side, actually, and I was guilty of it myself today, is that we always compare. So rather than seeing kind of modular or new ways of delivering something as its own product, we always try and compare it and get it to fit back into a box that we're really familiar with. And I think that's the problem with a lot of the regulatory issues, even the financing issues. It is a different product and it needs to be treated like that. And there needs to be specialist kind of packages for financing it. There needs to be a separate set of regulations that govern it, because it isn't a one size fits all. And I think as that starts to happen, more people will see it as being an easier route and will cut through the red tape and take it forward.
Okay. I'm going to just squeeze one last question in. It's from a professor of architecture, someone called Wafa Nadim, professor of architecture at the university in Cairo, who's saying that there's been a lot of scientific research and publications with regards to MMC and offsite construction. Does the industry make use of these? Do we make enough use of scientific research? Maybe very quick answers on that one. Ron, you were shaking your head.
No, absolutely not. And having been part of that community, it's very frustrating. But I think the problem is that to get people, as I said, to zoom out and look at bigger pictures is often quite challenging. So no, we don't make use of it as we should.
Okay. Olivia, would you concur with that? Or?
Yeah, I definitely would. But I also think the piece that we're missing is actually the education with trades and operatives on site. I think, to an element, a lot of fabrication and manufacturing is very upskilled and is very aware of the challenges and how to solve them. I think that interface of how you then bring that to site is a challenge, and I don't think the workforce on site is always familiar with what they're then going to be interfacing and integrating with, and that's where the education for me should be focused.
Yeah. Andrew, any last word on that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a bit of give and take on this, because there are lots of publications. Not all of them are necessarily entirely relevant. I've worked with the University of Cambridge for the last 12 years in this, and the question I always get asked is what's the questions we should be asking? What's the academic angle we need to look at? So making sure they have the right information and start in the right place. But then the industry is absolutely atrocious and diabolical at providing data back into institution, academia. So it's always astonished me quite how poor our industry is at gathering data.
Okay, and I think that's. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. It's gone really quickly, this one. So I think that's a sign it was a really good discussion. This session will be available to watch on demand. I think it usually takes like sort of 20 minutes, half an hour or so for it to be uploaded, but it should be available on demand shortly. Also, look out for our second Housing Today live webinar, which is this afternoon at 2 o'clock and is all about building services specification. Tomorrow, Housing Today live will be in Manchester, and we're doing a round table which is all about housing association development. That's to coincide with the Chartered Institute for Housing's annual conference, and a write-up of that discussion will be available in the coming weeks. But I think that's all from me for now. I'd really like to thank our panel, Ron, Olivia, and Andrew. Thank you very much. And yeah, that's all. And goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.